Qatar has typically been the mediator of choice for conflicts in the Middle East. But last week, Israel carried out its first ever airstrike on the country when it targeted Hamas officials in the capital Doha. Those officials were looking over the latest ceasefire proposal to put an end to the war in Gaza that had been put forward by the United States. So in this Squiz Shortcut, we are going to get to know Qatar better as a nation, its role in Middle Eastern diplomacy, and just why Israel's strike is so notable. Squiz Shortcuts is the backstory to the big news stories. I'm Larissa Moore.
And I'm Andrew Williams.
Now, Andrew, Qatar is the sort of country I reckon most squizzers have heard of, but like me, don't necessarily know that much about. Keeps coming up in the news, so it's probably a good time to get a handle on it. Let's start with pronunciation.
Yeah, so pronunciation is tricky. You've probably heard it as Qatar. We went and checked a bunch of pronunciation guides to make sure we had the right one. And the pronunciation that we're going with and the one that tends to be preferred is Qatar. So think of it as like a box cutter
like
is the closest sort of thing. So Qatar is the one we're going with. If we occasionally slip into Qatar over the course of this podcast, we apologise. But as a general, we go with Qatar.
Let's get into it. It has obviously been in the news a lot at the moment.
Yeah, it is. It's been in the news primarily because it's been acting as a mediator to negotiate peace between the state of Israel and the terror group Hamas, along with some other parties like Egypt and the US. And Qatar is known as prickly Switzerland. We'll get more into that later, why that is. But it plays that mediator role in the region in a similar way that Switzerland has done for other regions in the past. And it's well practiced because this is a region, the Middle East, that is no stranger to conflict.
No, it's a part of the world that is deeply, deeply divided along ideological and religious lines. Let's take a look at where Qatar is in the world. Let's position ourselves. First thing, it's really small. It's 160 kilometres across, 80 kilometres wide. For a bit of context for us here in Australia, it's roughly the size of the Greater Sydney Metro if you kind of stretched it out to the Hawkesbury and the Blue Mountains. The whole country is a peninsula along the Arabian Gulf. It has one border to the south with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, so on a map, it looks sort of like a thumb sticking out into the Gulf. To the north of it is Iran. To the east is the United Arab Emirates, and northwest is Bahrain. And while it only has a relatively small population, 2.7 million people, it's the third richest per capita country in the world behind Singapore and Luxembourg, both of which are very, very small geographical countries.
And very, very, very rich.
Yes.
But Qatar's wealth is relatively new. In 1971, they struck gas, but before that it was a barren desert with a relatively impoverished population. They herded camels in the winter. They dove for pearls in summer. They definitely weren't in the same league as their neighbours, Saudi Arabia. They were in the middle of an oil boom, but then came the gas discovery in 1971.
And that gas discovery isn't actually what they were hoping to discover. Yeah. They were hoping to strike oil like Saudi Arabia, but as new technology was developed, they were able to liquefy the gas and then export it internationally by ship. So there's a lot of complex economics there. But long story short, because of their position on the North Field, which is the largest natural gas deposit in the world, they've come to dominate the world's supply and they've become a very, very rich nation as a result.
Just to underscore that, to give a bit of context, the country's sovereign wealth fund, that's a state fund that invests and grows the nation's money. They own some pretty impressive assets. Harrods in London, the Shard skyscraper in London. They've got a share in the Empire State Building in New York. They also own the Paris Saint-Germain football club. Yeah,
some very, very famous names there. And so it's clearly a rich nation, but there is also extreme inequality in Qatar. So Qatari citizens make up just 10% of its population. The other 90% are migrant workers from countries like Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, and they most definitely do not get a share of that wealth.
Yeah, I remember these issues coming up a lot in the lead up to the 2022 FIFA World Cup.
Yes.
To prep for that tournament, Qatar built 8 stadiums, they expanded the airport, they built a new metro, multiple hotels, other big bits of infrastructure. They spent something like US $222 billion. But the other stat that goes along with it is that there was an estimated 6,500 workers who died on those construction sites.
And you might have seen in the news around that time the British soccer football superstar David Beckham was criticised for his role in promoting that World Cup given the labour conditions that were in place. He was also criticised by women's and LGBTQI plus groups as well because of Qatar's poor record on those fronts as well on a human rights level.
So Qatar's constitution declares Islam as the religion and Sharia as the principal source of legislation. Sharia law is a way to guide Muslims in all aspects of life, from worship to ethics and daily conduct, and it's very conservative.
Yeah, and politically this country is dominated by one family, the al-Thanis. So they signed treaties with the British in the 19th century and then they took formal control after gaining independence in 1971, around that time of the gas discovery. So the emir is Sheik Tamim bin Hamad al-Thani, who has been in charge since 2013 after his father stepped down. You might be wondering what an emir is. It is a Muslim military commander or chief. So Sheik Tamim is both. And so he's very focused, as you might imagine, on foreign affairs.
So that's seen Qatar invest heavily in what a lot of people call soft power initiatives. That includes the construction of the Museum of Islamic Art, the recruitment of top universities to Education City, and the launch of Al Jazeera, something a lot of news people would be familiar with. Highly influential news network that offers the West a glimpse into the Middle East. That form of engagement is in line with the country's approach to diplomacy.
So Qatar says we don't do enemies, we talk to everyone. And that strategy has seen it labelled, as I mentioned before, the prickly Switzerland, because it mediates conflicts like Switzerland does and provides neutral ground on one hand, and on the other, it's willing to host and hold talks with the leaders of controversial terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah.
And a lot of that particular strategy has to do with their location. They're so reliant on exporting their resources that they have a real vested interest in keeping things running smoothly because their whole economy depends on it.
And they're no strangers to it. Their first success was in 2008 when they brokered a settlement to a long-standing political standoff in Lebanon. Senior leaders of the Afghan Taliban have been stationed in Doha since the early 2010s. So Qatar has been the place where a lot of talks have been staged over the last 20 years now.
Taking that neutral stance hasn't always run smoothly for Qatar. They've faced accusations by both Saudi Arabia and the UAE that it was supporting terrorism. That led to a blockade and boycott of Qatari goods that went from 2017 to 2021. Yeah,
this approach that they have of talking to everyone is a real source of contention with their neighbours, and that's definitely something to be aware of as we dive into the rest of the context around their role.
Yeah, we're going to park that for a sec because up next we're just going to take a look at Israel's airstrikes on Qatar. So this is the bit that was in the news and what experts predict could be the consequences. Along with trying to engineer a peace deal in Gaza, no small feat, Qatar has been involved in brokering talks that ended the 12-day war between Israel and Iran in June of this year and getting Hezbollah to stand down against Israel in Lebanon in November last year.
Yeah, so Qatar's very familiar with Iran and its proxies in the region that have that common goal of eliminating Israel. Now, it might surprise you that Hamas has an office in the capital of Doha in Qatar. So Qatar has argued that that is necessary if negotiations are going to happen.
I guess the proof is that American officials have also been using Doha as a meeting point to participate in those negotiations with Hamas and Israel. One thing that's probably useful to point out is that Qatar and the US are allies.
Yeah, the US has built a huge airbase there. In return, Qatar gets special trade and military privileges. And you might remember this. You may have eliminated it from your memory bank because there's so much news going on. But there was quite a to-do about the US President Donald Trump prioritising a trip there so soon after moving back into the White House.
And if that's not quite ringing a bell, it might be the very fancy jet that they then gifted to President Trump. They offered him a new Air Force One valued at more than $600 million. Got to admit, I went on a bit of a side quest, dipping back into this jet. Grand spiral staircase, gold features, very luxurious. But anyway, Trump copped a lot of criticism for accepting that gift. So there we have Qatar and the US, good friends. We have Israel and the US, good friends. Makes things tricky when Israel carried out an airstrike in Doha for the very first time.
Yeah, so as far as that strike goes, Israel's military said it was a precision strike, in their words, against the leadership of Hamas and members of its ceasefire negotiating team. So those leaders were in their office meeting to discuss the latest ceasefire proposal that had been put up by the US. And while most of them survived, Hamas says that 5 of its members were killed.
And that included the son of its exiled Gaza chief, Khalil al-Hayya. The Qatari government furious about it. They called the strike a blatant violation of international law and its sovereignty, and they accused Israel of sabotaging peace talks.
And Trump wasn't happy about it either. So White House officials were given a heads up before the strike. They say they tried to warn Qatar, but there wasn't enough time. And although White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that the president has smoothed things over with Qatari leaders, assured them there's going to be no more attacks on their soil going forward, it does bring back into focus the US's perceived lack of influence over Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's decisions.
For Netanyahu's part, unapologetic. He says the targets were the plotters of the October 7 terrorist attacks. Israel's President Isaac Herzog also doubled down. He said, and the quote is, "If you want to move on, you have to remove some of the people if they are not willing to get that deal."
Yeah, so then it's worth also, as we mentioned before, thinking about some of the other countries in this region and how they feel about everything that's going on. So we mentioned earlier that Qatar hasn't had great relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but this chapter has actually brought them kind of closer together. So in the 2 days after the strike, leaders from those nations jetted into Qatar to show solidarity with it. They are very concerned about Israel launching military strikes on targets in other nations, and there's been quite a bit of analysis saying that the ripple effects of Israel's actions could last for years to come. Getting those nations on better terms would be a huge change to the balance of the Middle East, and it could ultimately make life more difficult for managing other conflicts in the region.
For now, though, Qatar says it's willing to continue acting in that mediation role. Now that we know a little bit more about how much its economy and security depend on stability in the region, it goes some way to explaining why.
Yeah.
And that's our shortcut to Qatar's role in the Middle East. Now, each week we like to give Squiz's recommendations for further reading, watching and listening on the topic. I know I mentioned I got a little bit sidetracked by the jet.
Understandable.
Clearly I like shiny things because I was also pretty fascinated at the leadership of the emirs in Qatar. So I wanted to take a look at the House of al-Thani, Qatar's ruling family. Did some Googling. There's a great article in Tatler covering Sheik Tamim's visit to the UK last year. Lots of meetings with the British royal family. Lots to gawk at.
And I've got an analysis piece from the New York Times. It's called "What Drove Israel's Brazen Attack on Hamas in Qatar." It's a good wrap-up of what many very well-credentialled experts think about the issue. A lot of it seems to come down with a growing frustration with the peace process. So that is a good read as well.
A bit of range in our recommendations.
Yes, always.
We'll put links to those in the episode notes. I did just want to shout out the Weekly Wrap podcast that Claire and Jodie did on the weekend. If you're wanting another run at why this attack was so significant, they covered it really well there too. You can find it in the News Club feed, and it's a good reminder to hit follow on that podcast. It's a great Saturday morning listen. They run through the week in news and what's coming up.
Absolutely. Invaluable.
Yes. Funny too.
Always. Yeah. But I particularly recommend Jodie's pirate impression from this last weekend.
Definitely
check that out.
Exactly what I was thinking about. Thank you for listening. Remember to share this episode with your mates if they want to get a handle on big news stories. And if you have anything you want us to take a run at, shoot your ideas through to hello@thesquiz.com.au. Until next time.